So we are going to start with the call of Moses. And the call of Moses you find in Exodus chapter 3 from verse 1 to 4. It's Exodus chapter 3 from verse 1 to Exodus chapter 4 from verse 1 to 20. So it's long, we can't read all of it, but I'm going to outline the main points. So Moses was looking after the flock of his father-in-law, who? Jethro, when the Lord appeared to him. So the Lord appeared in a flame of fire amidst of the bush. And the bush was getting burned, but it was not being consumed. So Moses went closer to look at the strange sight. And when he drew closer, he heard the voice of God who was telling him to do what? To remove his what? Shoes. Because where he was standing, it was holy. So he told Abraham that he was God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of who? Jacob. And that he had seen the people of Israel who were suffering in where? In Egypt. And he had remembered their promise that he was going to give them land. So he said that he was going to send who? Moses, to talk to Pharaoh. But Moses complained that he could not what? He was an outcast in Egypt, and that Pharaoh would not accept him. So number one, God assured him that he will be with him. And when he tried to ask who this God was, the name of the God who was sending him, he told him that I am who I am. So, beside those assurances, he also gave him miracles to perform. He gave him 2 miracles. The first, he was told to use a rod, which turned into a what? A snake. The second, he was told to put his hand in a pocket, and when he pulled it out, it was infected by what? By leprosy. So Moses also still complained. He said that he was not a what? An eloquent speaker. Or you can say he said that he was a stammerer. So he was told to do what? To take Aaron as the what? Spokesman. So Moses went back to Jethro's home, gathered his family members, and he started his journey to where? To Egypt. So what lessons did Moses learn about God from his call? We learned that God is holy, God is loving and caring. We also learned that God keeps his promises, and he is also beyond the understanding of human beings. And God chooses whoever he wants to take his what? His duties, to carry out his will. And God expects total obedience. That's why he wanted who? Moses to obey him. Also, he punishes his enemies. And he is powerful more than the Egyptian what? Gods. That's why he gave him 2 miracles. And then he protects his people because he wanted to do what? To help the Israelites who were suffering in Egypt. Why was Moses reluctant to go back to Egypt? There are several reasons why he was reluctant to go back to Egypt. It's because he thought that the Israelites would not believe him. Number 2 is that he was an outcast because he had killed what? An Egyptian. Moses was also reluctant because he was not an eloquent speaker. That is, he was a stammerer. Moses was also afraid of Pharaoh. And he felt that he was nobody to stand before Pharaoh. He also was reluctant because he did not have a clear understanding of the God who was sending him. He did not have a clear identity of him. So the Passover and the Exodus. And this you find in Exodus chapter 7 verse 14 to Exodus chapter 11. And we are going to narrate all there are 9 plagues that took place, right? Yes, without the inclusive of the dying of the firstborn. So the first plague was what? Turning water into blood. The second plague is frogs. The third, the fourth, the fifth, And the 6th are what? 7 is what? 9. That is 8. And 9 is what? Plague of darkness. So now we are going to talk about the night of the Passover. So the activities, because they are mostly asked, the activities that took place on the night of the Passover. Most of the time you're told to narrate the activities, and also you're told to do what? To outline the what they meant. So on the 10th day of the month, each family, Israelite family, was supposed to choose what? A lamb or a young goat without what? Blemish. A male 1 year old. And this young animal signified what? Innocence, if you asked what it signifies. Or innocence or what? Purity. So the animal chosen was supposed to be killed. And the blood was supposed to be done what? Smeared on the doorposts. So that when the angel of death passed, did not kill the firstborn of the what? The Israelites. So you have to remember the reasons. Also, the lamb of sacrifice was to be roasted whole, because this was the quickest method of what? Cooking, to show that they were in a hurry. The meat was supposed to be eaten with unleavened bread, because there was no time to do what? To leaven the bread. Yes, to add dough. It's just to leaven the bread is when you add like baking powder or yeast. Yes, so there was no time for that. So the unleavened bread was also supposed to be taken with bitter herbs, and this was to symbolize the slavery or the hardship that the Israelites were subjected in Egypt. And they were to eat while dressed, yes, and packed their luggage. And this was to show also they were what? They were in a hurry. The Israelite women were supposed to borrow jewelry and silver. Jewelry that is made from silver and gold from the Egyptian women. Why were they borrowing it? To act as what? Compensation for the work they've done. And remember that everyone was supposed to remain what? Indoors. Yes, in order to be protected from the angel of what? Of death. Remember, there is also the Passover. You have to note that it was to be commemorated what? Annually. And it was supposed to be taught to the coming generations. So from there, we talk about how the event was commemorated in the Promised Land. So when they went to the Promised Land, it was celebrated annually on the 14th day. They also took bitter herbs to remember the bitterness of slavery in Egypt. They also took unleavened bread. And they lived near the temple, and they went to the nearest temple to celebrate the Passover. They also slaughtered a lamb. And on that day of the Passover, or the remembrance of the Passover in the Promised Land, they did not work. And when the young children asked them why they were celebrating it, they were supposed to explain the meaning of the what? The Passover to the what? To the children. Lessons Christians can learn about God from the plagues. That is, God is more powerful than the Egyptian what? Gods. Because remember, when some of the plagues were taking place, Pharaoh was calling the what? The Egyptians God to protect them. Yes? But they were not able to. So he's more powerful than them. Also, another lesson is that God punishes wrongdoers. And also he protects, or rather you can just say, he rescues those he loves, and then he answers prayers, and he works through prophets or his people. The background of Moses, how it prepared him to be a future leader. So you talk about the background, you mention it, and then how it prepared him to be a future leader. Remember, we are doing revision. That's why if you don't have a point, you're supposed to hurry. Remember, I told you to do what? To summarize, the way I've summarized, so that you can be able to remember during the examination. So, Moses was spared when the Israelite children were being what? Killed. And he was rescued by who? Pharaoh's daughter. That is how his background helped them to be future leadership. Number 2, when he was young, he was also what? Brought up in Pharaoh's what? Palace. This was also to prepare him for future leadership. And in the palace, number 3, he was taken care by his mother, who told him that he was not an Egyptian, but he was a what? Israelite. And when he killed an Egyptian, he escaped to where? To Midian. And in Midian, he underwent a very rough time and hard life, which prepared him for the life in the wilderness when he was leading the what? The Israelites. So you have to remember the key word there is Midian. He also took care of his father-in-law's what? Flock, Jethro. And there, by taking care of the flock, he learned he could lead who? Human beings. And also, he lived with his father-in-law, Jethro, still, who was a what? A priest. And he therefore learned the ways of a priesthood. And he was married before God called him. That means when marriage was enabled him to solve a lot of social problems. Therefore, in future, when he was leading the Israelites, he was able to solve what? Their social problems too. And also, he had lived in Egypt, in Pharaoh's palace. Therefore, he was not what? He was not new to Pharaoh. Yes, he was not a stranger. He knew how Pharaoh was. Therefore, he was able to do what? To know how to approach him. From there, we go to the reasons why Israelites left Egypt. Why did they leave Egypt? Number 1, because they wanted to worship God in the wilderness. They also left Egypt because the new Pharaoh did not know Joseph. Therefore, he started oppressing the what? The Israelites. They also left Egypt because of the suffering that they were subjected to. And also because the Egyptian rulers felt that the Israelites could join their what? Their enemies and do what? And defeat them. They also left Egypt because they had cried to God. And God heard their what? Their prayers. And then also they had left Egypt because they increased in number. And increasing in number was a threat to the Egyptians. And lastly, they left because it was fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. Because he had promised, he told Abraham that his descendants will be enslaved in a foreign land for how many years? Yes, but God was going to rescue them or remove them and take them to promised what? Land. So, how the power of God was experienced during the crossing of the sea? So, when the Israelites were crossing the sea, the power of God was seen when Moses was told by God to lift the rod, and the water separated into what? Into two. Therefore, the Israelites were able to pass on dry land. Also, another power of God was shown when the Lord threw the Egyptian army into confusion. He made the Egyptian army confused. Also, God made the wheels of the chariots to come off. Therefore, it was difficult for them to drive. So here you have just to remember the wheels of the chariots came off. Also, Moses stretched his rod over the sea, and the waters lowered back, killing the what? The Egyptian chariots. Also, that was the power of God. So we go to the Israelites in the wilderness. And we go to the covenant at Sinai. So preparation the Israelites were to make before meeting God. Number 1, they were supposed to consecrate themselves. Number 2, they were supposed to wash their garments. They were also supposed to make a boundary around the mountain. Therefore, they were also, this brings to number 4, they were not supposed to go up the what? The mountain. And then lastly, they were supposed to abstain from sexual relations. You have to remember that it's chapter 19, because most of the time it's written in the what? In the examination, so that it can also guide you. So, in the wilderness, the Israelites, the Lord appeared to the Israelites in form of what? That is after, yes? He appeared to them in form of a what? A thick cloud, yes, over the mountain. Thunder and what? Lightning. A loud what? Trumpet blasts, yes. Also in form of what? Smoke. The smoke covered the mountain. Also in form of fire. And lastly, trembling. That is, the mountain trembled. So the sealing of the covenant. And the sealing of the covenant is Exodus chapter 24. And remember, when you're told to narrate the sealing of the covenant, you have to remember how the events or the activities followed each other. So number 1, you have to know Moses passed the laws of God to the people. He passed them the laws, and they said that all the words that the Lord has spoken, we are going to do what? We will do. And then there was a ceremony to seal the covenant. So at the foot of the mountain, Moses built an altar, and he placed the 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of what? Of Israel. He also sent young men to sacrifice young bulls to the Lord, and he took half of the blood and sprinkled it on the altar, and the other half he put it in bowls. So he took the book of the covenant and read it, and the people responded, "We will do everything that the Lord has said." So Moses took the blood, that is the remaining blood, half of the blood, he sprinkled it to the Israelites. So this was binding the God with the what? Israelites. And then he concluded by giving the Israelites the stone what? The stone tablets, which were written the commandments. So we go to the 10 commandments. This is Exodus chapter 20. And I'm just reminding you kuna mtu ajui the commandments. So the first commandment is that you shall not have any other God. Yes? Before me. Also, number 2 is you don't make yourself graven what? Image. Commandment number 3 is shall not use God's name in vain. Number 4 is keep the Sabbath day what? Holy. Number 5 is honor your mother, and 6 is shall not kill. 7 is adultery. 8 is 9 is bear false witness for your neighbor. And then number 10 is you shall not what? Covet your neighbor's property. So, what is the importance of the 10 commandments to Christians today? Number 1, it guides Christians on how to relate with God. Also, it guides Christians on how to have good relationship with other people, to live upright life, and lastly, to overcome challenges. You have to remember them like that. To relate well with God, have good relationship with other people, live an upright life, and overcome what? Challenges. It helps Christians to overcome that. So, how the 10 commandments are applicable in the life of a Christian? Number 1, you have to say what the commandments warn against, or what they urge you to do when you're told how they're applicable in the life of a Christian. Number 1, Christians are warned against worshiping any other what? God. They also warned against swearing God's name falsely. They are also told to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. Also, Christians are urged to show respect to parents. They are also supposed to respect life because life is sacred. And they are also supposed to avoid any irresponsible sexual behavior. And they are forbidden from taking any other people's what? Property. Or even envy it in any other way. So that's how the commandments are applicable. So, breaking of the covenant, that is in Exodus chapter 32 from verse 1 to 35. So you remember how the Israelites broke the covenant. So now we are going to talk about why the Israelites worshipped the golden calf. Or you can be asked why the Israelites did what? Broke the covenant with God. Yes? It's still the same question. Number one, Moses delayed up the what? The mountain. Number two, they were influenced by the what? Polytheistic practices of the Egyptians. So Egyptians worshipped many what? Gods. So that influenced them. Also, another reason why they worshipped golden calf and therefore breaking the covenant is Aaron had weak what? Faith. And then there was also availability of materials. They had jewelry made of gold and what? Silver. Remember the jewelry that they borrowed from the Egyptian what? Women. So it was available. Therefore, they could use it to make the what? The golden calf. Also, the Israelites had forgotten to serve God. Renewal of the covenant, and this we are going to read Exodus chapter 34 from verse 1 to 4. Let us read.
Be ready in the morning, and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai, and present yourself to me on the top of the mountain.
As the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand 2 tables of stone. And the Lord descended in the cloud that stood with him, and proclaimed the name of the Lord.
Keeping steadfast the love of thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation.
And Moses made haste to go his way before the Lord, and worshipped.
And he said, if now I have found favor on thy sight, O Lord, let the Lord, I pray thee, go in iniquities from us, although it is excuse me, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and set us for thy name's sake.
And he said, behold, I make a covenant before all the people and do covenant, as I have not been found in all the earth or in any nation. And all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is terrible things that I will do with you.
Observe what I commanded you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites.
Take heed to yourself, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither you go, lest it become a snare against you. You shall tear down the altars and break their pillars, and cut down their idols. Thou shalt worship no other God, but the Lord whose name is jealous, is a jealous God.
So the instruction the Israelites were given for the renewal of the covenant. Number one, they were told to obey the Lord's what? Commandments. That was the first instruction. They were also supposed to tear down the altars of the false gods. They were not supposed to marry with foreigners. They were supposed to keep the Jewish feast of the Passover. They were supposed to rest on Sabbath day and keep it holy. They were supposed to sacrifice and offer the best produce and animals to God. They were not to make cast what? Idols. And lastly, they were supposed to dedicate their firstborn to God. Those were the instructions for the renewal of the covenant. So attributes of God revealed during the renewal of the covenant is God loves, God is gracious, is slow to anger, he is merciful, forgiving, and he punishes those who do wrong. He is holy, and he is what? Jealous. So if you're asked how the Israelites showed respect to God in the wilderness, number one, they kept the Sabbath day. They offered sacrifices and offering to God. They observed festivals, or rather you can just say they observed many festivals, for example, the Passover. They also made altars, which symbolized the presence of God. They also had religious leaders. And they chose priests from the tribe of who? Levi. Yes. So, what were the duties of these priests from the tribe of Levi? Number one, they offered sacrifices, they taught the law, they organized prayers, and they organized what? Choirs. Or rather, you can just say they organized singing. So, some of the ways of worship that are in the wilderness that have been adopted by Christians today. So Christians today still make what? Altars. So we adapted that from the Jewish ways of worship in the wilderness. Christians also still observe the 10 what? Commandments. Also, they still observe their what? Certain feasts. For example, the Last Supper. Today also, we have religious leaders, just like them, but we have now priests and what? Pastors. Christians still observe the Sabbath day and keep it what? Holy. Although the Sabbath days are different. Some do on Saturday, others on Sunday. And then they offer God what? Offerings. Problems that the Israelites faced in the desert. What problems are these? Yes, number one, the desert starts from there where they cross the Red Sea, right? So number one is Pharaoh pursued them using his soldiers. Yes, that was the first problem. Lack of food and water. They were also beaten by poisonous snakes. At times their faith was shaken. They also had, their faith was shaken when they started worshipping the what? The golden calf. And they were attacked by the hostile desert tribes. For example, the Amalekites. There was also ash what? Desert what? Climate. It was very cold during the night, and during the day it was very hot. And then the distance was long and what? Tiresome in the desert. Those are the problems. So, problems the Israelites faced when they settled in Canaan. When they settled there, what were the problems? Number one, they fought wars with the people who are in Canaan, or you can call them inhabitants of Canaan, and these were the Philistines. There was also difficult in them changing from nomadic lifestyle to agriculture. Nomadic is whereby they move from one place to another, yes? But now they had to go to the lifestyle of agriculture. That was a difficulty. They also faced famine. Remember, it's desert, right? So it's dry. They also, the environment was not familiar with them, and they lacked effective leadership, especially after the death of Joshua. They lacked the effective leadership, and influence from the Canaanite culture. That was also a problem. And that is the end of Moses.